Star Wars creator George Lucas made it abundantly clear that the Force is out of balance when one succumbs to the dark side. He did this back in 2010 in the writer's room for the animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars. But numerous Star Wars fans have come under the impression that the Force is in balance when the light side and the dark side are on equal footing. However, this is not how Star Wars creator George Lucas has explained balance in the Force. The idea that the Force is in balance when the light side and the dark side are on equal footing likely comes from watching Star Wars The Clone Wars, and specifically the Mortis trilogy episodes created by Dave Filoni. I think there's also some comments by George Lucas made around when the prequels were coming out. There's a couple by Time Magazine. We'll get into those. I didn't cover them in this article, but we will cover them in this video. But let's focus on the Mortis trilogy arc in the Clone Wars. That was part of season 3. So in the show's third season, episode 15, Overlords, a character named the Father states a family in balance, light and dark, day with night, destruction replaced by creation. Too much dark or light would be the undoing of life as you understand it. So after Anakin completes a test taming the Father's children, he informs him, but this is yours. It has been foretold. The chosen one will remain to keep my children in balance. The idea about the balance would be reinforced in the subsequent episode Altar of Mortis. When the sun appears to Anakin in a vision, he instructs how simple you make it, light and dark, as if there is one without the other. Aligned, you and I can restore balance wherever we go, peace to the universe. After Anakin rejects his offer, the sun shouts in fury, we will destroy the Sith and the Jedi. Interestingly, I think that is kind of, the sun is almost offering this opposite idea that the dark side can actually bring balance through order. Obviously, I think he's lying, and it's a perversion of actually what Lucas is actually talking about here, where it's the light side. It's classic projection, where you have this have this devil telling you a lie, trying to convince you that what he's saying is true, when it's actually the opposite. This idea would be even further emphasized. Just kind of like give you an example of this that my pastor usually likes to give. He says, "But before you sin, the devil on your shoulder is always telling you, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's not really that bad. And then once you have sinned, the devil's saying that God will never forgive you. You've done such a terrible thing." And that's kind of what the son is kind of doing here. He's acting like that devil and offering like to bring order and preying upon Anakin's own pride and ego about bringing order. This idea would be even further emphasized in the opening intro to the next episode, the third and final of the Mortis trilogy, Ghosts of Mortis, where the narrator states, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano are caught in the middle of a treacherous battle between good and evil. The scales now tip toward the dark side. Our three warriors must guard against attack as they plan their escape. So I think it's very easily to misunderstand that there's this idea that they're supposed to be kind of like a light side and dark side in balance. They're equal to each other. And even if we go over here to Reddit, this was like compiled 5 years ago, I think after The Last Jedi. Yeah, I think that was around like 2018. So I think that's right after The Last Jedi. But this user here compiled this stuff and provided some quotes here from George Lucas. Speaking on episode 1, the making of episode 1, there's the overriding philosophy in episode 1 and all the other Star Wars movies, for that matter, is the balance between good and evil. So again, I don't really think that says anything. He's always talked about good and evil and what that balance is, and that balance is, which we'll get to, is basically rooting out the evil and staying in the good. In each of us, we have to balance these emotions, and in the Star Wars saga, the most important point is balance between everything. And again, I think, we'll get to this, balance for George Lucas. I know it's contrary to what we think of as balance on a scale, but balance for George Lucas, in my opinion, is actually being in balance with the light side or the good side, and you keep the evil side at bay, and you do that through discipline and the training of the Jedi. The idea of positive and negative, that there are two sides to an entity, a push and a pull, a yin and a yang, and the struggle between the two sides are issues of nature that I wanted to include in the film. And again, I actually think this is true. We see people descend into the dark side. Anakin Skywalker descends into the dark side from like the good that he had done. We know that he can operate on the good, but he falls out of balance when he consumes himself and falls into the dark side. And I think the confusion here is the fact that he's using yin and yang, and he uses balance, and he's using these terms. I think he doesn't explain what those terms mean. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, because he's using terms that have different definitions from, I think, how he's using them. And hey, maybe you can say that I'm taking them out of context, but I think I'm going to make the argument here that this is what he means, because we're going to have another quote from him as we go. But I wanted to go through these two. Force has two sides, light and dark. It is not an inherently malevolent or benevolent thing. It has a bad side to it involving hate and fear, and it has a good side involving love, charity, fairness, and hope. So clearly, I think he's a little bit contradicting himself there, because when you're saying that it it's not inherently malevolent or benevolent, but then saying it does have a bad side and a good side, that kind of contradicts itself, right? And again, I think he's talking about human nature and like the concupiscence of humanity, that you're kind of attracted to that dark side, and in order to suppress it, you have to find that discipline and find that good side and stay in balance to suppress the dark side. And that's when you're in balance, is when you reject the temptations. And finally, he says, I wanted to have this mythological footing because I was basing the films on the idea that the Force has two sides, the good side, the evil side, and they both need to be there. Most religions are built on that, whether it's called yin and yang, God and the devil. Everything is built on the push-pull tension created by two sides of the equation right from the very beginning. That was the key issue in Star Wars. Again, so I think the yin and yang, again, is very confusing, but then when you get to the God and the devil, because it's very different theology there. When you're talking about Christianity, and I think yin and yang is like Taoism. I'm not really familiar a lot with it, but I definitely think that there's a very difference in that theology, right? That yin and yang is actually talking about this kind of balance, whereas like in Christian theology, the devil has been defeated, and he's just trying to bring as many people with him to be defeated as well, whereas God is trying to give hope. He sent his son to die for us on the cross, and wants us all to join him in heaven by following his commandments, being disciplined, rejecting that concupiscence of original sin. And I really think I think George Lucas, as much as he says that he wanted to distill all of these religions that he looked at, and I think, interestingly enough, when you do that, you get to the Christian teaching on the matter. And I think that is very, very obvious in Star Wars, especially with the Force. But let's get to what George Lucas had to say back in 2010 when he was discussing the Force during a writer's meeting for Star Wars: The Clone Wars. This is what he said. He said, the core of the Force, I mean, you got the dark side and the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. So again, he's talking about there's two forces, right? One is selfless and one is selfish. And indeed, there are two forces. I'm not going to disregard that. But he goes and says, and you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is that it goes out of balance. And then you get really selfish and you forget everybody. So I think it's very clear right there. He's saying that you're in balance when you have suppressed the dark side. You're not embracing your selfish nature. You're not embracing that concupiscence. But you go out of balance when you do indeed embrace that. When you start getting selfish, you start sinning, you let your pride and ego take over. He goes on and says, and ultimately you lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you get afraid somebody's going to take it away from you, whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure or experience. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you or you're going to lose, then you start to become angry, especially if you're losing it. And that's clearly, he's talking about pride, greed, ego, all of that stuff kind of wrapped into one. And that anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering, mostly on the part of the person who is selfish, because you spent all your time being afraid of losing everything you've got instead of actually living. I think that's very succinct there. In contrast, he said, where joy, by giving to other people, you can't think about yourself, and therefore there is no pain, but the pleasure factor of greed and of selfishness is a short-lived experience. Therefore, you're constantly trying to replenish it, but of course, the more you replenish it, the harder it is to so you have to keep upping the ante. So once you kind of get into that dark side, you want to keep descending down it, which we see that with Anakin, right? He does indeed kind of descend towards that path, down that path. You're actually afraid of the pain of not having the joy. So that is ultimately the core of the whole dark side, light side of the Force, and everything flows from that. And I think he very succinct there. I think he explains it really well. I think he addresses all of those kind of quotes that we saw there from the people on Reddit that are trying to argue that balance is this yin-yang style idea, where I think he's very clearly saying that it's out of balance when you start getting, you let your pride, ego, your selfishness take over, and that's when you go out of balance. When you start devolving into the dark side, you are out of balance. He then elaborated, obviously the Sith are always unhappy because they never get enough of anything they want. Mostly their selfishness centers around power and control, and the struggle is to be always able to let go of all of that stuff. Again, he's talking about detachment here. That's a very Christian teaching, being detached from like that materialistic nature. Whereas, like, obviously, the Sith are very attached to things. They want that power. They want that control. They want to, in Anakin's case, he wants to keep Padme alive. As he explains here, he says, and that's the problem with Anakin ultimately is that you're allowed to love people, but you're not allowed to possess them. And what he did is that he fell in love and then married her and then became jealous, and that he saw in his visions that she was going to die and he couldn't stand losing her. I would actually argue that I think a better explanation of that is that he's no longer seeing her as that human being anymore. He's not seeing her as his wife. He's now seeing her as an object, as a thing to be collected, to be controlled. And he kind of gets into that here, but it's not very explicit. But I think that's really what you see there. And so in order to not lose her, he made a pact with the devil to be able to become all-powerful. That devil is obviously Sidious, Emperor Palpatine. But of course, when he did that, she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, so he lost her. So again, he wanted to like keep her, to keep control of her. He had this fear, this vision that she was going to die, and then eventually he loses her anyways because he made this deal with the devil and was beginning to treat her as an object as well. Well, let's continue here. He says, once you are a powerful being able to bring her back from the dead, well, if I can do that, I can be emperor of the universe. I can get id of the emperor. I can do everything. I can make everything the way I want it. And once you do that, you'll never be satiated. Interestingly enough, Christ actually does do that. He does rise from the dead and grants us salvation. Again, you can see the Christian messaging in what he's talking about here. You're always going to be consumed by this driving desire to have more stuff and be afraid that others are going to take it away from you. And of course they are, because every time you get two Sith together, you have the master, you have the apprentice, and the apprentice is always trying to recruit another apprentice to join with him to kill the master. And the master knows that basically everybody below him wants his job. Lucas then asserted the only way to overcome the dark side is through discipline. The dark side is pleasure, biological, and temporary, and easy to achieve. So he's clearly saying here that you can indeed overcome the dark side, and you do that through discipline. Thus, again, you can easily infer here that the balance then is suppression of the dark side, overcoming the dark side. The light side is joy, everlasting and difficult to achieve. A great challenge must overcome laziness, give up quick pleasures, and overcome fear, which leads to hate. And you do that, again, through discipline, through training, through the Jedi Order. I'm sure that you could also introduce other types of disciplines that would do that. Obviously, Star Wars, it's primarily the Jedi and the Sith, and that's how they kind of manifest. But I could see it manifesting in different ways, and I think there's actually an interesting dynamic that I think they kind of explored in the expanded universe, where one of the big issues with and even Lucas kind of explored this in the prequels, one of the big issues with the Jedi is they were blinded by their own kind of ego and pride as well. That's why they weren't able to see the manipulations of Sidious, and that led to their downfall. And then they were obviously corrupted by war and everything like that goes along with that. So I found that really interesting. But let's get back into this too. Back into the Mortis trilogy arc here. And I think you can see kind of what he talks about in the Mortis too, but it's definitely muddied, and I don't think it came out very clear. But in that Mortis trilogy in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, I definitely agree. It muddies the water with how it portrays the balance of the Force as being an equal part dark side and light side. There are hints teasing Lucas's idea about it becoming out of balance because one succumbs to selfishness. In Altar of Mortis, the father instructs the son, vanity, however, is getting the better of you. You have done what is forbidden. You've chosen the dark side and allowed it to feed your anger and desire for power. The son retorts, by bringing the chosen one here, you've shown me my potential. You've only yourself to blame. To which the father responds, do not do this, son. Do not become what you should not. Be strong, I implore you, or else I will be forced to contain you. So you can see here that the son seemingly wasn't, like, he's supposed to be some kind of manifestation of the dark side too, but then they're saying he's like descending into the dark side and all of this vanity and stuff. It's a really poorly, I think it's a really poorly done entire trilogy on multiple different levels. The storytelling is kind of really choppy, and then you have this different kind of philosophical underpinnings here. They're playing both sides of the coin here. I think they're playing that yin yang thing, and then they're also playing obviously the other side where it's like, okay, you are clearly out of balance when you're descending into the dark side, and I don't think it works really well at all. and they should have just stuck with you're out of balance when you go to the dark side, as the father is kind of instructing the son here, instead of what they had done in the earlier in the episode. So I think George Lucas has very clear on what this means. I think it addresses all of those other quotes, and I think from that Reddit subreddit. But let me know what you think. I think it's very clear, but hey, maybe I'm wrong on this. But let me know.
Subscribe for more.